All right, so the first question was, how's our perception of future nuclear threats changed? And I think it's China is the short answer. Now, this is an interesting view graph that I got, and it shows where the DIA, CIA, Stratcom, and OSD estimates of how many nuclear warheads the Chinese had have been since, well, for the last 40 years. Um, you'll notice it's pretty flat. I mean, there's not a lot of change here. Now, part of this can be explained by the methodology that our military intelligence folks used. Uh, First, they say, well, they have a no first use policy. You can read that in Chinese and in English. And we will only count a warhead if it's associated with a launcher that we can see. And so they would go out and look for launchers, and the numbers never were very robust. And so the numbers that they thought, we could count on the Chinese having were around 2 to 300. Now, I don't want to come off as a wise, well, a wise guy. Okay, I'm trying to speak correctly here. But there is a tradition of getting things wrong about nuclear warheads. Sometimes I think we tend to think we've overestimated. Well, I guess maybe for a short while, in the like 1960 maybe, but mostly we've underestimated. And if you take a look at the Russians at the end of the Cold War, we discovered we were off by 100%. That's a big number. I mean, we had spent all these years trying to get the number right. And when we finally sat down with the Russians and asked them how many containers they need to store nuclear weapons for possible dismantlement, the number they came up was 40,000, and we assumed they only needed 20 because that's what we thought they had. Wrong. So this may be, the same kind of thing. I mean, we don't exactly know what the Chinese have after all, but this is perhaps, and I'm going to argue, is potentially a very lowball approach. And even the Pentagon, to its credit, has said that they think the numbers now are going to be much higher. So that's what we thought. What's the next slide? This raised eyebrows, and it helps explain why we moved to a bigger view of what the numbers might be. This was something that went public in 2010, but had been brewing for a while and was discovered by someone studying unclassified information, I might add. It was not the intelligence community that first broached this, but rather someone who taught at Georgetown University. And you'll see those pink splotches on the Chinese map. Those are what the approximate area of tunnels. And if you add those up, it's 3,000 miles of underground tunnels. These tunnels, by the way, are not dug with pick and shovel, but with the most sophisticated European tunneling equipment you can buy. And they're in some pretty hard places. Not only that, but they have air conditioning, and they're not your mother's tunnel. Okay, they're pretty neat places to hang out if you have to be underground. 3,000 miles. Well, it was speculated. Well, if you had one missile every 1 mile, holy cow, you could have a lot of missiles. And why would you pick 1 mile? Well, because if you spaced them out 1 mile each, you would need a nuclear weapon, just to take one out. In other words, you can buy a lot of protection against the first strike with this system. And you'll notice the Pentagon graphic to the left shows that there might be reloads. You see those little missiles next to the tunnel to the left? There are like 8 of them. And then there's one launcher. Well, they're suggesting that the old methodology of counting a warhead with one launcher, not going further, might be wrong. All of that kind of came part and parcel. This caused quite a stir in the arms control community. They were very resistant to the implications of this revelation. unhappy, I think. The next slide. Compounding this was the revelation 5 years later that, well, they had learned to put multiple warheads that could be targeted on their missiles. Now, I can remember back in 1990 working in the Pentagon, trying to convince my superiors that we were giving this technology to them and we needed to stop. I guess fortunately for me, before I could get anywhere, uh, the elections came and I was thrown out of my political position. So I don't have to bear total responsibility for this cock up. But in fact, we helped them because launching satellites with multiple bus dispersal systems uh, is really the source for military MIRVs, and we were helping them with launching multiple satellites, and that technology eventually resulted in this. So, what is the implications of this? Well, instead of one warhead per strategic launcher, there could be three, there could be five. And if you're really in the school of the extremely anxious, 10. Oh my. Okay, well that's not helpful. And you can see the missile numbers; they're familiar to many of you. 31s and 41s. All right. Next slide. This blew the doors off the whole matter of, well, it's not as bad as it looks. Because when this set of pictures came out, sort of the Israeli take on things became a little more popular. And the Israeli take, when they're asked, well, how bad is it? They said, well, someone says, well, it's not as bad as it looks. The Israeli rejoinder is, no, it never is. It's always worse. Now, I think looking at this, it really caused a lot of heartburn because it's 350 holes. What if they fill them? And they are. How many warheads will fit on the top of each of the missiles that fill each one of these holes? We do not know. It could be one. It could be none. It could be three. It could be five. It could be 10. Now, as we'll see later, it was revealed that, well, they have filled enough that we now can say conservatively they have more ICBM warheads than we do. Well, that's interesting because that didn't used to be the case just 3 years ago. Something's changed. Okay, not only that, but these silos are vulnerable. So they would have to launch if they wanted to survive under warning or under attack. That's a small step from the dreaded, feared kind of attack we all bite our fingernails about. It's called a first strike. Gulp. Okay, well, this is sort of how things change, but kind of like that steak knife set that you see advertised late in the evening. There's more. They're the paring knives. Let's go forward. There are more things that we discovered. This is something I and my center emphasized and had some success in finally communicating over several years. It took about 5 years. And that is, hey, what about the civilian nuclear infrastructure? Can't that be used to make bombs? And in particular, the focus on fast reactors, the extraction and recycling of plutonium in fast breeder reactors looks like it would add to the trouble budget because although we don't know much about their holdings in weapons fissile material, highly enriched uranium, and separated plutonium, it is generally believed, and with cause, that they're short on plutonium. Well, what if I was to tell you they're ramping up nearly tenfold in plutonium production capacity from a reprocessing standpoint? Next chart. And 60-fold in the production of super weapons grade plutonium, which has tremendous advantages over just reactor grade, fuel grade, or weapons grade. You can make more weapons out of less material if it's super weapons, and half of the production of these breeders will likely be super weapons grade. And it's just naturally the way they work. If you want to maximize electrical production, you end up making in your blanket, about half of the plutonium is super weapons grade. So, if they tune these things, they might get more, but just conservatively, this is going down. So this kind of had caused a bit of a stir when I finally was able to get this analysis in the right hands. Let's take a look at the next slide. Well, you'll see that there's this report with the moniker of my operation. I'm bragging, so you all should be terribly impressed, because I don't get to brag very much. I managed to get this in front of the head of the Strategic Command through someone I knew at the DIA, who got it to all the people at DIA. And the upshot is that in the last year of the Trump administration, they said low 200s was what the Chinese had, and that there might be a doubling. And then after they put it out, people started to say, well, it might be more than a doubling, it might be a tripling. I think someone even said, well, yeah, it might be more than tripling, it might be, quadrupling. Well, but that isn't what they said in the report. They said a doubling. The Biden administration, for reasons I can only speculate about, but it's fun to consider, and I have some ideas, went a lot further. And they used this report, which astonished me, as part of the excuse for going not to a doubling, but to saying, oh, there'll be 1,000 nuclear weapons by the end of the decade. And now, more recently, by 2035, 1,500. And they cite the report in a very backhanded way. I think the ethics terrorists were afraid that if they cited the actual name of the organization, I would benefit. But they refer to a Western think tank. Well, there's only one that did this. It's the one that's run by the person who's talking right now. And I was told that this, in fact, was the case. And this has been recognized by other people that I don't even know that was the report. So I'm pretty sure this report had some impact. I gotta hope and believe there was something other than this to base this projection on. But I did my small bit. Maybe it helped.